the government of Serbia as an input and as a guidance to build their national cert and how to build their national cybersecurity strategy. So it's one of the examples on how the work that we are doing here and the collective discussions that we have can actually impact communities, can impact policy, and can actually everyone here provide feedback on how we move forward on the security of the internet in the work of instant response teams. So as I finish this recap, I just wanted to give a little, it's really brief summary of the key discussions on the mailing list and of the key points that are addressed on the report. So I'm not going to read the report here, and it's also not our intention here today to be discussing paragraphs and wording, because that could be done through the review platform, that could be through the mailing list, but it's really a summary of some of the points that got more debate and that we could have some more input. And if anyone wants to follow the document and see, it is still on the review platform, but actually it's not on the table of contents, so you actually need to go specifically for the tag CCERT BPF to get the latest version, or to the mailing list and get the URL. So on the early conference calls and discussions on the mailing list, one of the conclusions the whole group came is that we had too many topics to move forward coming from last year. And one of the things that everyone noticed is that actually even subtopics that we were discussing, like CSIRT and privacy and policy, actually would be part of a misconception around the role and responsibilities of computer security incident response team. So the forum, the consensus of this forum was to have this overarching theme of misconceptions around the role and responsibilities of CSIRTs. And that actually covered other sub-themes that included CSIRTs and privacy, policy making, and CSIRTs, and how CSIRTs could influence policymakers, and how policymakers had a need to understand better what the technical community does on the CSIRT area. There was a lot of discussion on supply chain approaches to cybersecurity. That is actually how to get everyone involved, from the development to the deployment to the maintenance of any system into security, and how to involve everyone into this phase. We had 3 case studies submitted from Switzerland, Netherlands, and Korea. And the report itself and the discussion was driven by a questionnaire that was sent out to several communities. This questionnaire is in the Annex 1 of the report, but I'm not going to repeat all the questions here. And before we go into the contributions from our panelists, I thought it was beneficial for everyone in the room and remotely connected to just make a summary of the main themes that we discussed. I think the #1 conclusion and consensus of the teams is that defining what is the role and what's the purpose of a computer security incident response team has been a concern of various parties. We have especially governments and other organizations needing to have better understanding on what are the limits, what is the effectiveness, and what are the trade-offs depending on what to do. And more, we have CSIRTs having a preeminent role into defending economies, defending national security, as well as citizens. So there is a lot of changes on this role too. And of course, this has an implication for the constituency, for trust and cooperation, because CSIRTs have been pretty much technical people to help, and they are now being called to provide input into policies, and sometimes working together with law enforcement, with some security agencies. And that has been a very big debate on how that would strain trust amongst CSIRTs, each other, and on cooperation. So, and there was this also consensus on people who spoke about that it's very important for CSIRTs to help to educate, to help actually to bring the word of how we can improve information security, how we can better handle incidents, how we can detect problems to policy making, and to try to influence for us to have better policies overall on the internet. And there is also a consensus about the privacy debate, at least for the people that participated in the discussions, that CSIRTs are actually key for keeping privacy for the citizens, are key for actually, as we put here, custodians of privacy, because more and more we have computer security incident response teams try to act fastly when we have data breaches, when we have security problems that could lead to privacy concerns for citizens. And we have more and more CSIRTs working to detect infected machines, to detect computers that could be exfiltrating data or could be affected by attacks that would hinder the privacy of the citizens, and they are working to act fast before major consequences take place. And there was a lot of discussion too about how cybersecurity can benefit cooperation between all the areas of IT and law enforcement, and in this was really more raising awareness that is a trade-off, that you need to define very well how far the cooperation goes, and for that not to be considered something that would damage trust on the team. There's also another discussion about vulnerability disclosures that is being treated in other forums, and that CSIRT should also be involved into that, into actually how do you deal responsibly with information about vulnerabilities to actually help the whole software community in that area. But this was basically just a summary that I think it would be nice for everyone to be on the same page here, and would set the scene for the contributions from our panel. And actually, I would really like to start calling now the panelists to contribute. And I would like to start with Mr. Maktar Sek from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Mr. Maktar.
Thank you. I think it is a very important topic for all African countries, the issue of cyber security. As you know, in Africa, we are faced several challenges. The first, it is a low capacity, and that is increase the vulnerability of our system. We are also in most, not in all country, but in the majority of the country, a low technical and human capacity on IT skills. And we have also a proliferation of center with low user of the regulation. The regulation is not very well done in several African countries. Also, we have the lack of the protection mechanism at the regional level, because cybersecurity is not now a national issue. It become now a regional and continental issue. We need to put in place a mechanism at sub-regional first before to go to the regional. Also, in terms of awareness, it is very limited. Yeah. When you discuss with the government, a lot of government are not aware on the issue in terms of national sovereignty, national security, to the use of the ICT tools. It's very important for the government also, this awareness campaign. Also, I think when we talk about CERT, we need also to involve the young graduate on the issue of cybersecurity. And they are not involved in a lot of country. Why I think the report is very interesting for us at the United Nations Economic Commission Africa, to improve our support to members country. We support African country and regional community, also African Union, in several areas to put in place the ICT policy strategy, to help them to set up a national computer emerging response team, and also at the regional level. We already help African country to develop this African Convention on Cyber Security and Cybercrime. We work also to develop the sub-regional CERT with ECOWAS, East African Community, and also EAC, East African Community, and also the Community for West Africa. But now what we can bring on the table with this report is now for Africa. We have some cert. You have some African country who already have a cert established. I can give you some example from Tunisia, the first in Africa. You have Kenya, you have Egypt, you have Nigeria, South Africa, you have some. But now for us, the first question is how to build or to create this cert in Africa at the national level. It is one important question. We can discuss about the technical issue. The trust, if the user can trust to this institution, what kind of capacity they need, and what kind, very important, the cooperation. It's very important at the national level within the government and also within the other country, and the cooperation with the other cert. Yeah, the volley of cooperation is very important. I have also what kind of resource we need. The efficiency of the resource working in the cert is very important. It is a linkage with the capacity building in the country. The linkage is with that did we have a right institution in Africa to build the capacity to be faced to the challenge for the cert. It is some question we can bring on the table, and I think the report can go more on what the mechanism to institutionalize this cert. If the cert going to work as a free of charge, we're going to generate their own resource. And what is the role of the government, of the partner, and of the sector, private sector to institutionalize this cert? I think there is some question we can, is very helpful for us. If in the report you can highlight, maybe for the 2015 report, and we are ready to contribute with the experience we have at the continental level. Thank you. I'm going to stop at this time. If there is any question, I can come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maktar. So I would like to give the floor to Audrey Plonk from Intel to provide some feedback. Audrey.
Thanks, Christine. Good morning, everybody. I'm at Intel now. I have been for 7 years, but before that I was in the part of the U.S. government that houses the U.S. CERT. So I've worked with Christine for a long time on CERT-related issues. So if you're wondering why would you have Intel here, it's maybe a good question. I just want to commend the effort of the group and the Birds of a Feather session last year to put together the report. I think it raises some very important topics. I think I'll focus my comments on the sort of data processing and privacy aspects of this because it's an issue that I think has evolved over time, over the years in terms of the kind of data that certs have access to, what they do with it, how they process it, and who they share it with. And one of the key important roles that certs play is to share information with each other, across national borders, with the private sector, and within the government. Usually a cert will sit within an agency like Cert BR is in the registry here in Brazil, but it also will need to share information with other aspects of the Brazilian government to help different ministries and departments secure their systems. And so the sharing of information between certs, from certs to the public, from certs to the private sector, from certs to within the government, is a critical role that they play. And national laws and jurisdictions around both data protection and privacy, as well as other issues like public access to information, national security laws, surveillance laws, and other things, have an impact on a nation state's view of data and privacy and how the information is processed. So I think I completely agree with the report's points about the fact that without CSIRTs, you won't be able to promote privacy, whatever your definition of privacy is. and that they are critical to achieving the goal of protecting people and users. I also completely agree with the concept that security and privacy are not some set of trade-offs that you have to constantly make, that really it's more of a balance where if you want more security and more privacy, or if you want more privacy, you have to add more security. If you want more security, you have to add more privacy. So it's often characterized as you have to, you have to give some privacy up in order to get security. And I think that's, it's an unhelpful way of thinking about it, because if without some of the security aspects, you won't achieve the privacy. Now, that isn't to say that there are some challenges in negotiating mostly around the kind of information that needs to be shared in order to analyze systems, to understand malware behavior, and to protect users. It's not to say there aren't privacy and data protection related concerns there that need to be dealt with, but characterizing them as mutually exclusive problems is not helpful, and I think the report does an excellent job of pointing that out. And then the other thing I would say in response to the report is the concept, the recommendation that, or the idea that I think the report puts forward about, could we move from talking about privacy, which is a general context about that applies to many aspects of one's life and environment, not necessarily technology or the internet, to moving to talking more about data protection, which is much easier to be defined in laws, and people can get their head around it a little bit more when you're talking about data processed by CSIRTs. I think that's a very good recommendation, not because privacy isn't a concept that we all care about, but because in the context of CSIRTs, it's very hard to put an operational organization in the role of making societal and cultural judgments about expectations of privacy, which are not, it's not a reasonable place for an operational organization like a CSIRT to sit. Those discussions and those debates can be informed by the kind of data the CSIRT has access to, how it needs to be shared, how to build those sharing relationships. That can inform policies and processes that more broadly think about privacy. But I think the report points out that it's a challenge in that space. Just two more quick comments on the evolution of, I think, CSIRTs over time and the challenges. Just looking back at the experience in the United States in 2003 or 2004, when we first established a government CERT with an external-facing role, meaning a CERT that was responsible for working with the private sector and working with other CERTs. Quickly privacy issues were raised, and processes started to be put in place for doing privacy impact assessments on the processing of data and things like that. And I think that as the complexity of the technology and of the ecosystem has increased, there has been more and more debate about, certainly in the US and I know in other countries, about how the private sector should share information with the government for the purposes of analyzing malware and solving technical solutions to either incidents, like real live incidents, or ongoing research around malware. And I guess I could talk about that for a very long time, but I will give it back to Christine just to say that I think that it's become it's no longer just do we have a privacy law? There's many other aspects of a country's legal system and policy framework that have an impact on that. As I mentioned, freedom of information laws in many countries, the public has the right to request information from the government that may otherwise not be made public or available. And that has some implications on the kind of data that CERTs would share with the private sector, or the kind of information the private sector would share with CERTs. So it's when thinking about the CERT role with regard to processing data and privacy, I think it's important to step back from the very technical world we live in and look at the various legal and policy mechanisms in a particular country to understand the best way to address whatever the issue is and advance sort of the policy solutions there.
Thank you very much, Audrey. I would like now to call Mr. Taylor Roberts from the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center. So, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much for having me up here. I do just want to say that I'm not directly involved in a CERT. I'm actually one of those social scientists that some people flinch at, so do take my commentary with a slight grain of salt. I wanted to make one sort of content-related point and then two broader points for discussion that I hope we can maybe address at some point. And the first is that at one point in the report, there's a discussion on the clash of cultures, and that sort of on the one hand, you have demands for the protection of economic and national values, and then on the other, you have the sort of more libertarian internet community that sort of values the ability to engage dynamically and the ability to tinker and to be able to develop new technologies. And when putting it on the one hand and on the other hand, it makes them seem like they're oppositional ideas, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. In fact, I think there might actually be evidence to support the idea that it's possible to have a positive relationship between the pursuit of these values, that the pursuit of economic and national security values, that if approached dynamically, could actually provide opportunities for this ability to tinker and be flexible. So just making sure that they're not necessarily oppositional cultures in that respect. And I do want, here's the second point that I wanted to make is that are we actually beginning to observe sort of clustering in the evolution of CERT functionality? So for example, at one point they said in the report that there is sort of three emerging themes that are sort of popping up, and if anyone is following along in the report, those three things are brought up in paragraph 84. So you got, on the one hand, the government wants to have an increased role of the CERT, where they sort of take in a crucial capacity for the wider nation. On the other hand, you have the sort of technical community that wants to make sure that these CERTs have a limited role to respond to incidents. And then on the other hand, you have this sort of relatively new engagement with the private sector. And so are we actually beginning to see that CERTs are sort of clustering around these different values in terms of what they want the CERT to be? And if that is the case, then I think that these cluster, as the paper correctly indicates, can utilize some statistical comparability, like the OECD report that's been produced, and then some more nuanced understanding of what the effectiveness of a CERT would be. One of my colleagues is actually working on looking at metrics for measuring success and effectiveness in CERTs. And while those are very, very broad, it's actually one way of potentially clearing up some of these misconceptions that the report addresses about what the role is. If you're able to understand how the CERT achieves its mission, then you might be able to more clearly demonstrate to others, what exactly its role is relative to others. I also think it would help with this sort of throwing a CERT at it problem that the Switch CERT in Switzerland addresses. That it's my work in cyber capacity building, we see quite frequently that the CERT is going to be all of the cybersecurity fix in the country, and we're going to let it take the role for everything, and that may not be the necessary role for that institution. And if we're not observing this clustering, where you start seeing these, government wants this, technical community wants this, private sector has a different role, then I think it might actually be useful to develop a document that highlights sort of lessons learned in the evolutionary process of a CERT, and sort of how I think that it would actually see that the trends may not be uniform. You may not see these clustering necessarily, but if you can see the nuances and the shifting functionality of these CERTs, it would help mutual understanding and, as our colleague from the UN pointed out, maybe help actually establish these CERTs so that they can take advantage of what existing CERTs have already done. And finally, I want to make one last question, and that the overall impression I get from this report is that you're starting to see a shift away from the T in CERT, which being team, and towards more of an I being institution. And that I think that the connotation associated with these terms, particularly the team, is that a team is a little bit more informal, a little bit more dynamic, a little able to adapt and utilize these sort of informal relationships to manage incidents effectively. And that actually is important when being able to mitigate the high innovation level of threats. So if there is a shift towards more institutionalization of certs, how can we embrace the positive aspects of that process, that being sustainability for certs, without losing the benefits and trust that being a team denotes? And that's, I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. And just to clarify to the panelists that when we invited the panelists, it was on purpose that we tried to bring people that are not technical people and they're not working in a cert right now. So it's because I think the most valuable feedback is the feedback for people that are from outside to kind of bring to us exactly what's happening, if last year like misconceptions and privacy, and to have this balance. So it's really the main purpose of here and of this session to get the feedback of everyone. So even people that do not participate during the year in the mailing list and all the discussions, we really want to hear especially the feedback for people that are not working in the day-to-day of a cert. So if I think we are succeeding right now that it's really to have this outside from the community views on what we do. And I would like then to pass to Mr. Thomas Lamanauskas from ITU for his remarks and feedback here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel and to share our experiences and our views on both paper, but also generally on the cert development and needs. So, and one of just to, for the ones maybe who are newer to our work, just to why we are here and what are we doing in this framework. So we've been under our cybersecurity activities. We have been, helping our member states, which is all states of the world, to try to set up certs and to strengthen their cybersecurity capabilities. In that regard, we in the recent years had done 65 cybersecurity assessments. That means helped 65 countries to understand their cybersecurity capabilities, implemented 13 certs, 13 national certs, and now are in progress of doing 4 more national certs, and improving 1 additional cert that's already implemented, as well as going beyond that with cyber drills, so helping to build collaboration among the certs. So we've done now 13 of those cyber drills, with the latest being in Kigali, Rwanda this year, and with the participation of more than 100 countries. So it's a bit of a experience here. However, at the same time, with our activities, also have to admit is only the dent in the needs, in the big vast need that is necessary to be done. We still have 90, as at least we count 91 certs, national certs that need to be implemented. So that is, there's a lot of work for everyone, and there's a lot of white spots still where if we don't fix them, as we discussed in some other panels, our security of all of us is at risk, because again, as discussed elsewhere, cybersecurity specifics is that each of us is only as secure as our neighbor and as the weakest link, because cyber attacks can have impact for us from anywhere. So again, I think collaboration, that's one point is, again, with this panel, collaboration is greatly important, and and some of us here also closely linked to GFC, a Global Forum for Cyber Expertise, and ITU is also a member of that. That was launched earlier this year, April this year, in The Hague, and we specifically are one of the co-sponsors. I think that's how it's called, of the CSERT's maturity initiative. So working together with the partners, especially Netherlands, Microsoft, and Organization of American States, again to help various countries to together again to make the certs more mature and more progressive. Now, so this is the scope of the work, what's needed to be done. Now, about the specific aspects that the paper touches about misconceptions, and we definitely fully agree that you cannot throw cert, as Taylor was saying, at every problem. Cert will not resolve everything. There's a role for various parties there. The certs, there's a crime community, there are other law enforcement, there are judges. The whole community needs to work together. There is together and to make sure that cybersecurity culture is properly achieved in the country. However, at the same time, I think we shouldn't be naive, thinking that we can protect certs or national certs in the same shape or form as when it started, you know, in more informal, more flexible, collaborative environment. You know, the times have changed not only for CERS but generally for internet and ICT ecosystem. You know, for the good. You know, because that means everyone is now much more interested in this area because this area impacts so much more. So naturally, all the other stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, defense ministries, and others, are becoming more and more interested in that. And I think we shouldn't be naive to thinking that we can, you know, remain isolated of that. You know, so CERTs are getting more and more involved in this process, and you know, for the better, because on one hand, because they are of course linked to other stakeholders and other stakeholders use them, but also sometimes maybe for the worse, because sometimes these flexible informal ties are much more difficult now to implement. And we can see various initiatives. You know, there was some discussion about so-called, you know, international Red Cross for cybersecurity, you know, building on a CERT model and kind of CERT collaboration. Whether it's something that could fly or not, that's to be seen. But there are these ideas being floated, you know, that's recognition with the achievements that CERTs have been made. But I think, again, and building on it, but I think we should also understand this will evolve and CERTs will change and some new functions will be added. And it's more about how we handle that and how we preserve the best of CERTs rather than how we resist it. Also, it's of course important regarding the importance of maturity of the environment, because also the paper talks that maturity, you know, is for the CERTs to be established, other elements are important, and indeed we agree with that. However, what we also observed in the countries where we worked, actually starting to set up the CERT is that sometimes acts as a good seed for broader cybersecurity review and broader cybersecurity capabilities building. So basically, you know, you start the project for building a CERT and you identify what are other gaps, and then the government realizes, okay, we need broader cybersecurity policies. CERT will not be the only answer, but that, you know, yes, we have now opportunity to convene the stakeholders because we're now building CERT. So looking at the establishment of the CERT and building the CERT, not only in isolation as we building that function, but also as a trigger and seed and kind of central sometimes for the broader, for starting and kick-starting and the broader cybersecurity discussion, and you know, being as a first excuse in some countries, bringing all the relevant stakeholders to the table and starting to building that trust that's needed for other areas. And indeed, what's, again, reiterating what paper says, and we truly agree, trust is important. Even in that more formalized environment, still human links and trust is very important. So both national stakeholders, between national stakeholders and internationally, part of, for example, cyber drills purpose is not just to kind of test the capabilities, but basically also to bring people face to face, so that people know from one country, they know another country, then after that they can call each other, you know, on a technical level, look, I have this problem, how can I resolve it? Or look, this is happening, I see this happening in your networks, can you do something about that? Even if it later on needs to be formalized. So I think that's also an important point. So overall, I think really commend the IGF Secretariat and lead experts on this good paper, and I think this starts a very good discussions, and hopefully will lead to some further good work, especially bringing all the relevant stakeholders to the table and making more dent in that important area. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, all the panelists. I think we had very good feedback, and we still have quite some time. We have more than 50 minutes now, and I would like to open the discussion, open for comments, for questions, so I would really get to a point of a session that would be really an open microphone. If people would like to share their views on the paper or comment on anything that was talked here this morning in the panel. So anyone would be the brave first one? So, but you need to come. So I would ask for the people in the back if there's a microphone for questions. Yeah, because there is no poll here in front. Can you bring? Oh, there's one in the back. Okay. So, okay, you can go in the back.
Oh, is it me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You are with the mic at hand.
Yeah,
and we
perfect.
have time for
Thank
several
you.
questions.
Hi, my name is Frederica. I work with the international nonprofit HIVAS. I'm the program manager of the Digital Defenders Partnership, and we actually do emergency response for human rights defenders. When I read this document, I have a few things. I've written them down. Overall, I think the perspective is very much from the government and corporate side. So what I'm really missing is like a text to human rights defenders, especially if I read like paragraph 43, where it says that there are regulatory clauses in the legislation which allow CSIRTs to perform their work and access private data for the purpose of securing the networks. There's a very thin line there which can be misused by repressive internet regimes. So I would like to address that. And that might potentially endanger human rights defenders. On the issue of trust, I think as long as there are companies involved in the CSIRTs, then there's a whole different drive. Companies are there to make revenue, and the human rights defending digital security experts we work with are, really standing for the human rights. So as long as those companies are involved, I think the trust is really, really difficult. And then I'm missing some guiding principles, like do the CSIRTs really align with the human rights declarations? Can CSIRTs consultants, for example, sell themselves to internet repressive governments? This will actually also counter-affect human rights. And then on the last bit is I'm missing kind of a holistic approach. Consequences of digital attacks, like going into emotional well-being, physical security. So that was it. Thank you. So it's not really a question.
Do anyone want to comment on the panel? I have a comment later, so do what like Audrey? It's on.
Can I just ask a question back? What was the paragraph you cited? I thought you said 43, but I don't see that in 43. So I think maybe you're referencing the Network and Information Security Directive that is pending in the EU, maybe? Is that
it's the contribution from the European Commission to this report underscores our findings, and then it quotes.
So I think it is this
one.
one.
So that's paragraph 40.
In mine it was 43, but maybe I have not the most recent version.
I think it's 42.
Then. Okay, sorry.
So I have the 43 here, that the contribution from European Commission, that is a quote that privacy in itself is not a limiting factor. Is this one? Okay, just to make sure.
There may be other Europeans here that want to answer that question too, but I've been involved in the development of the NIS directive for many, many years, and I think the intent here is to make sure that the parallel pieces of legislation in the EU, the General Data Protection Directive and the Network and Information Security Directive, well, the General Data Protection Regulation, what will become a regulation when they finally adopt it, and the Network and Information Security Directive, and the difference, for those not very familiar with European law, a regulation is mandatory and applies specifically across all member states, and a directive is a framework in which member states can implement in different ways as long as they can prove that they've achieved the intent there. So the Network and Information Security Directive is going to be a directive, so it will be a framework, and the General Data Protection Regulation will be a regulation. And that regulation has been debated and ongoing for a very long time. And the purpose here, I think, and maybe it's a little bit out of context, so that may be why it's causing some concern, is so to ensure that the General Data Protection Regulation and how it deals with process specification and processing of data, so that it doesn't negatively impact the ability for CERTs to do malware analysis and to share things like signatures and other security-related information that will help people protect their systems. So they wanted to be clear about allowing CSIRTs to continue to do the work around security. I think I appreciate all the. I didn't quite understand. I will say I didn't quite understand the point about tension between corporations and human rights activists. That we can follow up and you can explain more specifically what you mean there. But I also just think I totally agree with many of the concerns you raised. But I would say that the policy issues and judgment calls around human rights and speech-related issues and beyond that, and how to deal with certain regimes, I think it would be very challenging to put that at the doorstep of the certs to solve, because while they certainly have, they may touch those issues, I think it's really not the remit generally of what a cert is supposed to do, and the expertise doesn't usually sit there. I'm not speaking for Christine because she has extensive expertise in many things, but I think preserving that community is really very technical and very operational, and not polluting it with too much other judgment calls directly. I think you could pile so much on that it would really negatively impact their work. So
I would like to get my hat now as one of the lead experts and take off the hat of the chair of the session. So, and these kind of comments is really the comments we are welcoming, and we want you to provide this feedback. In the report of the last year, we focus more on what a CSERT is and what a CSERT does. And from this perspective, we want to hear more, and we would like to understand more. And from your comment, I would just like to add that there is no organization that could actually make a statement in name of all the instant response teams around the world, because really this and the word teams, it's really pretty loose, because you have instant response teams that are inside an organization. You have instant response teams that are national. Like in the case of CERT Brazil, we are part of NICBR, that's a not-for-profit organization. So we are the national CERT, but we are not tied to the government. So there are many models, and really each CERT serves a specific constituency. So I would say that probably all CERTs that we work with, they actually really that are in the community for a long time, they abide and they respect human rights, although they don't have a statement. So I would say really for the technical community. And one of the things is really when we talk about information sharing, that is like we have to define it. When we were talking about, instead of talking about privacy, talk about data protection and talk, we actually share information based on, it's not really personally identifiable information. Most of the times we're just changing information about new techniques, new attacks. In the case of the certs that we share, work more, we anonymize whatever data we share. So I think maybe one of the things that Audrey made a point here as a feedback, and that you were pointing, I don't know, maybe stating in the report that needs to take consideration into anonymization and into really what's the minimal data that you should be collecting. This is something that we do in our daily operations at CertPR and at other certs, and maybe that could be a feedback into the report to just make sure that instead of helping privacy in a way that you are trying to see if someone's compromised and it has a malware that is actually there to get information, to hinder the work, and we know that cases like that happen. It's really that needs to take into consideration that. So, but please feel free to talk to us. We are delivering the final report in 3 weeks. So, and we are going to get all the feedback from this session. There's the mailing list and all the feedback. So really we want this kind of feedback, and we want some discussion back and forth, really to try to understand if there's something that we missed, if there's something that is communication, but it's just a point. So there's a question in front of you.
Yeah, my name is Fabrício Pessoa. I'm from Axur, Brazil. And first of all, I just want to apologize because I'm pretty new to this process of creating this document. So there are some comments that I want to make, but I wasn't sure if it should be discussed further in the list or not. But anyways, I'll get back to you after that. But my comment is that I really like what Christine mentioned about bringing out people from other areas to discuss things, because I think this is one of the main points. I think that a lot of the misconception problems that we have is that the lack of communication, right? Because maybe, for example, just giving an example, the CSERT is just one actor of the whole process of incident response. It's not, the difference between the CSERTs and the other ones is that usually the CSERTs are the one that are, whose core business is to do that, right? So we are the ones that are most interested in getting things solved, and usually the ones that have more knowledge about how to deal with that. But we are not the only ones. And so I think that this is one of the main things that we should try and work on, is bringing the other actors of the process and talk to them. Because maybe we also have misconceptions about their roles, right? Maybe we expect them to do things that they are not the ones supposed to do. And maybe there are things that nobody knows who is responsible for. You know, I can give you the example of for example, internet fraud. When you have a phishing, right? We detect, for example, I work as a private CSERT, we detect and we report to the ISP. And we expect them to solve the problem, but some of the times they're just going to say, look, this is not my job. So whose job is to act upon that? The police? Maybe. We don't know, right? So there are things that we need to discuss and get together and find out solutions that work for everybody. Because we are the ones who are interested in solving the things. So we have in our minds ways of doing things that we know that would work, but maybe it would not be suitable for the other actors. So I think this is one of the points that can contribute to solving the problem misconception and many other problems that we have in this area.
Thank you. Any comments from the panel? Anyone? Thomas?
I think it's not, I don't saying anything revolutionary, but I think that was discussed on BPF on spam. But I think this only shows that we cannot resolve these issues in isolation. Now, it's not about whether CERT will engage with other stakeholders with the CERT. We just need to sit everyone around the table, you know, and that's what we again see from our national practice. You know, even when we go and talk about CERTs, you know, we ask our national counterparts to bring other stakeholders, be it Attorney General's office or judges and other critical infrastructure providers, to bring everyone around the table and to have that discussion. But I think, you know, you can trigger that from the CERT angle, but I think it's also important to kind of have a general discussion. What are the different roles and different responsibilities? And that's not a bad way for IGF to progress in terms of you know, its BPF work.
Thank you. I think there's a question on the back there. If anyone could help with the micro. Oh, you have the microphone. Thank you very much.
I already want it. Thank you. Vladimir Radunovic, Diplo Foundation. I wanted to add to the work, basically, of the Best Practices Forum, experience that we had from Serbia. So we did a local project on raising the capacities and awareness about cybersecurity in Serbia, where we carefully tried to map the key people in different institutions, and I'm talking about the government institutions plus internet service providers, telecoms, and so on. And probably a good point is that we managed to use the best practices document as a kind of a starting ground for the group discussion. So we basically kind of adapted it and translated it into Serbian. We didn't keep the whole document, even though we kept the reference. We shortened it a little bit, but it was quite a useful document, as most of them said, as a background of understanding what the certs do, what is the role, how to organize it, and so on. And it was also kind of help for discussion. The main obstacle, and that's maybe sharing the experience from Serbia, which is quite interesting country because it's on the way to European Union, but at the end, it's on the other hand, it's still transition country with a lot of problems and a kind of a firm governmental attempts to control things. Is that the main obstacle was explaining that simply cybersecurity cannot work without trust and cooperation. It's not something you can impose from the top down. That as a Finnish colleagues and Slovenian experts from CERTs and the Israeli and the others that were in the project helping explain that there needs to be trust in order for companies and everyone else to share the information, otherwise it just doesn't work. And our experience was that in all these governmental institutions, well, at least in Serbia, but I suppose in other countries as well, there are people that actually understand that and know, or there are potential that can understand that works their way. It's just that those people, including the army, security services, and so on, are not high in this hierarchy to be able to push the understanding of that. But creating a group of people that understand in different institutions, telecom sector, and so on, and making them work together on this, at least in Serbian case, seems to show results now. It's a long process, but this kind of building community beyond the sectors and multi-stakeholder in the best possible meaning of that word is a good experience that we can share. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input. Yeah, we had some input about Serbia in the report, but really hearing how the experience was and to put people together is, I think, very, very valuable. Any other comments from anyone? questions in the panel here. So there's one here in front.
Thank you. I'm Ben Creek from New Zealand. I just wanted to make a comment about trust, and that especially with public-facing CSIRTs, one of the most important things is trust of the security community. And I think one of the institutional things when we're talking about institutions is putting a CSIRT or a national CSIRT inside a signals intelligence organisation is usually a really bad idea. There's a lot of professional expertise crossover. But so for me, New Zealand is a very small country. I know a lot of the people who work inside our National Cybersecurity Centre. They're top-notch information security professionals. I would never tell them about a 0 day. They work in a signals intelligence organisation. That's in the Five Eyes. I know where it's going to go. It's not going to go to a software developer. So yeah, I think that's quite an important component of trust is not, institutional trust, but the community trust is really important.
Just to comment that this is very important, and this was one of the topics that were more discussed into the mailing list. For people that were in the mailing list, several people from several countries that have their certs either being created or moved to some intelligence areas that were raising questions. And I think Walt wants to make a comment now.
So Walt Natus, I've got a question back, because one of the questions in the document is whether a decision to put it into an intelligence service or something to do with national intelligence. Do you think that was a conscious decision of the New Zealand government to do so, and did they oversee the consequences on trust? Because that's one of the questions we addressed and didn't get an answer on. Do you have a view on that, whether it's unintended or whether it's a deliberate choice they made with the overseen consequences? Could you comment?
Could you bring the microphone back to him, please? Thank you.
Yes, so New Zealand doesn't technically have a national CSIRT, so the people inside our signals intelligence organisation look after important government and critical national infrastructure. So I would say it's organically grown based off professional skills and independence. So, malware reversal, actually having access to the information and network packet capture. There's a lot of overlap in skills as opposed to a very conscious decision. So they don't provide support to the private sector, and having been in government previously, if you're not in the really important departments, it's incredibly hard to get a hold of them or get any useful advice. So yeah, I think there's currently decisions going on around there, and the where it's looking is there's a conscious decision to move and make sure that any national CSIRT is not inside a signals intelligence organisation. I'm waiting for cabinet. So.
Yeah. Audrey?
Just a point from the private sector to reinforce what our colleague here from New Zealand said. There's been quite a debate in the United States over the years about, private sector sharing information with the government, and it's, in summary, basically a non-starter for the private sector to be sharing this information with signals intelligence agencies or with surveillance agencies, and so there's been a very strong pushback from the industry to ensure that the national CSIRT remains in a civilian agency responsible for protecting government and protecting citizens and not for conducting surveillance. I think that's an important point.
And adding to that, just a little for the experience in Brazil. Of course, it happened 20 years ago, so the scenario was very different. But how CERT-BR was created was actually in, as many of you probably heard this week, so in 1995, we had a process in Brazil to create the Brazil Internet Steering Committee, to be a multi-stakeholder body to take on the issues of internet and standards and internet critical resources, and not on regulation, because internet's not regulated, but on coordinating the efforts. And at that time, the first report that was asked was a report on how to move forward with cybersecurity. That at that time was not cyber and was not internet governance, so all those terms were not there yet. But the very first report was, which structure could we have in Brazil? Because people are being compromised, there are complaints coming from outside the country, we don't have anyone. And that report actually called for a neutral organization that could provide a neutral ground for a report for support for instant response, and that it should be as independent as possible from government or private sector. And as true independence is very difficult because someone has to pay for the function and someone has to have the money at the end. It was the Internet Steering Committee itself, with the money that sustains NIC-BR, that comes from domain registration, that maintains CERT-BR. But we are a free service for the country, and as the Internet Steering Committee is a multi-stakeholder organization, and as NIC-BR is a not-for-profit organization, we are in fact seen as a neutral organization. So this is how things evolved in Brazil, and probably why we still were neutral and things were evolving rapidly. But there are a lot of benefits in being a more neutral organization. I could not share if that is better or not, but we see that more and more organizations ask our advice, ask for us to coordinate meetings among different sectors to try to solve security incidents. So we try not to take sides, and we try to anonymize information all the way. So I was just wanted to share a point of view of a country that does not have, but we have other teams with national responsibility in Brazil, one specifically for the government. And having a team specifically for the government as a national team does not mean that we cannot have another team that's a last resort. So, and that was reflected last year in the report. But I think it's very interesting to have these discussions, especially because of privacy, data protection. So I think comments from Audrey for data protection are very interesting too. So I would pass to Thomas.
Just also to adding this thing about trust building and how actually sometimes from my own experience, because I was involved in my own country building a national cert when we just kick-started the idea. Until when we kick-started the idea, that was part of the telecoms regulator, but we didn't have any mandate. And actually that helped, because then we had to convince all the stakeholders to come and work with us. So it seems like something that seems more difficult, because you think as a government authority, you'd rather have a mandate than you can compel people to come. But then if you compel people to come, they don't necessarily want to come, and they will come reluctantly. When you have to build a trust because you don't have a mandate, but because then you have to discover what community actually needs from you and how you actually can contribute and where you create value. And then through that, you actually build that trust, which later on, even when it's formalized, can become like already the basis of trust is there. So even when it's formalized already, personal relationships are there, people know who they talk to, how it works, they know how they together came to that point. So just the point is that sometimes, these not very kind of mature, not the best solutions actually sometimes can lead to the better result than trying to kind of from the very beginning to say, this is how we're doing, this is the clarity, because then kind of people get a little bit afraid of that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other comment? There's a comment again in front.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one thing that I saw in the report on paragraph 36, that there's the question about how we engage other stakeholders. And I think this is one of the difficulties that we have, again, because as I said, we are the ones that want the problems to be solved, right? How can we bring the ones that are not really interested in that? And I do have a suggestion, the thing is that I think that sometimes we need to go where they are. Right. I take as my example at my company. We wanted to get a better relationship with ISPs and hosting committees and so. So we started doing some research about hosting events and go after them. We cannot expect them to come or them to just all of a sudden become interested in that. I know it's difficult, right? And it's especially because we sometimes don't have the resources and how to organize that. But we have to go there, and for sure, when you go there, you start talking to people. You might get one person that is interested, and then we can bring maybe that person to bring you to the event next time and talk about the topic, and that way you can increase awareness and interest, and especially taking the advantage that when we have that opportunity of being there and showing and talking to those people, at the end we live in a world that is money oriented, and basically the main thing that people worry about is what do I get or what can I lose, right? So we can bring that and show them that it is interesting for them and what they can get from this relationship, this better relationship with the CSERTs and the better communication with that. And then they can start understanding and we can have a better approach and show also that we want to help them. You know, it's not we are not one against the other, but we are looking forward to working together. So from our perspective, just using as an example, instead of complaining that the ISPs or hosting providers would not answer or respond, we try to say, what can we do to help you deal with this issue? I think that this is, when we look forward to cooperation, it's always better to offer something before you ask, right? So we can bring and see, look, let's see how we can do for you, and maybe this is an approach.
We have a comment from the panel. Mr. Maktar, you want to make a comment? Thank you.
Yes, I want just to raise the issue, the relationship between the government and the other partner. It is a big problem in our continent. Why I think to increase the awareness and the interest for each other is very important. And the report, I think, could highlight more the issue of our awareness in the role of the different partner to build this cert. The other issue also very interesting, it is the regional collaboration. And there is a lack of some example in developing country. I think we have a good model in Eastern African country. They put in place a task force for cyber security since 2008. And there is a committee, and they provide annual report to the head of state on the incidents in the region every year. I think it is an example to follow for other African country. There is the issue of the privacy protection of the citizen is very important. I can give you one example. One country requests us to help them to put in place a cert. When we went to this country, we would like to organize a meeting with the government, the ISP, and the academia. And what the government tell, why you want me to share my information with this entity? When you go to this entity, they told you, we don't have a trust for the government. We are not going to share our information, but we can get problem after. There is the issue of trust is very important, and also the protection of privacy. But some government can use this information to against their population or their private sector. I think we can highlight this on this report. But the best practice, it is a good and bad example. Yeah, there are bad examples we can highlight in the report, and people and a country can learn about this. Thank you.
Wouter, going back to your comment, I think that could be a recommendation for all the best practice for, because I can give you one example. In the other one, I assist as IGF Secretariat consultant. I actually went to one of the meetings out of my own account to try and get the support from the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group. And just because I was there, I was able to get all the valuable inputs because I had hours time to discuss with people how important this work was, which they had never heard of. So in other words, I think you're completely right that if you want to engage other stakeholder communities, you have to be able to be at those stakeholder communities. But is that a possibility which is feasible for the IGF? That is, I don't know, but we can take that up as a form of recommendation for future work. That is something we can agree upon, that is important to do so. So please give some feedback on that.
There's a comment here in the front. Thank you.
Hello? Sorry. Yeah, Andy Purdy with Huawei Technologies. Are there processes in place in the multi-stakeholder model to share information about incident response teams or ISPs who are not cooperating fully and deserving of trust?
Just to clarify, you were asking if in the IGF there is a process to engage the ISPs?
I guess I'm asking, is anywhere in the multi-stakeholder model there a process to communicate to those looking for who they can trust about whether or not there are any incident response teams, CERTs, national or otherwise, or internet service providers who do not fully cooperate and cannot be trusted?
I would say that if you talk about the multi-stakeholder as the IGF, what we have are MOG, we have APWG, and we have FIRST, that they all talk to each other. So FIRST brings together incident response teams. MOG has the whole industry working with anti-abuse, and APWG, the industry with phishing, and there's a lot of overlapping in there. And in those forums, they have some statistics, and there is some informal, there is not like a shaming of whose ISPs are not cooperative or what stakeholders, but you can see by the roster of members and by the ones participating, the ones that are actually writing best practices and writing best practices in the way to move forward. So like yesterday when the comment Thomas made about the need to bring best practice forums together is because there is being a lot of talk that a lot of the discussion is happening in the spam and happening here. They're kind of the same. Maybe the way forward to have like a more general best practice on how to have a more secure and reliable internet. But these forums, they will not be replaced. We are just complementing here in the work in the IGF. So there are forums from my perspective that already are dealing with that and that were working, and that you can find which are the responsible ones. But sometimes, especially one of the challenges we identified last year, and is a challenge that is very true to Brazil and to the countries of Latin America that I know, is that most ISPs and most people, they don't have money to travel and they don't have money to join the forums. So, and I believe that might be true also for Africa. So these forums, they also have to reach to those countries to see if they are reliable or not. Like in the case of Brazil, we try to be kind of an arm and make the conversation easier, even if the people cannot participate, because at the end, you cannot just build trust by saying that you are a team or build trust by an NDA or an MOU. Trust is really something that you build working together. So I think this is the major challenge, that you cannot just sign a document or abide to something and magically you get trust. And this is a consensus that comes from all the communities. So I don't know if that addresses your question, if that was what, or if anyone else has a comment. See that some people are talking. Audrey?
I think I know what your question is, Andy. I think a lot of the trust systems are sort of their barrier to entry systems, so you have to demonstrate credibility in order to enter the club, sort of thing. And that's certainly true for FIRST, which is more on the incident response side. On the ISP side, there is something called INOC DBA, which is a network of or a communication mechanism for network operators, and the standard of entry is fairly high. I think you have to be, like, as an individual, not as a company, but as an individual, you have to be personally vouched for by a set of people who have been on the system for so much time, and I don't know the exact parameters there. So it seems like there's a lot more about sort of whitelisting people, if you will, instead of blacklisting people in any kind of formal way, at least that I'm aware of. It seems like the blacklisting is more of a off the record, offline, don't talk to that person, do talk to that person, that kind of thing.
Thank you. It just seems like it may be something we want to consider, where there are certain ISPs in the world who do not cooperate and who are basically helping to hide malicious activity that continues, and that if we could perhaps get the global community to consider at least blocking traffic from those internet service providers until they act in accordance with the kinds of frameworks that Audrey talked about, it might help us not just talk about trust and not just earn trust, but try to help make the environment safer.
Just to make a comment on that, our position in CertPR, let's say we don't encourage blocking too much, and especially because a lot of times the fact that you don't get a response doesn't mean that they are not responsive. It means sometimes that they just don't understand. They don't know what the community, they don't know who is reporting. A lot of times what we are seeing happen in several countries is that people running the network don't have understanding of English. Sometimes the complaints and reports are too poor and people don't understand what's going on. And then you start having, instead of an open and inclusive internet, you have a very patchy, blocked internet. Like in Brazil, by the time we were, for example, sending a lot of spam, nobody wanted to understand what was going on. People were just blocking the whole country. So that is not productive. We have been on that end of the line. And I think we should be talking more about how to not have too many problems. There, of course, are bulletproof ISPs out there, but it's not really trying to make a huge blacklist that you are going to say that this ISP automatically is harboring criminals. From our own experience, most of the time, they just did not understand that abuse was happening. They did not understand that the specific client was actually abusing, and they just didn't know better. And this is something we were discussing yesterday at the Spam Best Practice Forum. We were discussing a lot about how to improve and to have more security of the ecosystem discussion. And I think what we're discussing today kind of highlights that maybe we need to bring everyone under one umbrella. So, but I would like to move any other question, comments back and forth, comments from the panel, questions from the panel to the audience. So. There's a comment, Taylor.
So one of the things that the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center at Oxford does is we've developed this maturity model to help understand cybersecurity capacity, and it looks at capacity in a very, very broad sense, ranging from the policy to the technical. And we've reviewed about 10 countries up to this point. And one of the things, once we get to incident response, is that we speak with multiple different stakeholder clusters in every country. And so that means that we're not just talking to the CERT about the CERT's role. We're also talking to the private sector about the CERT's role, civil society about the CERT's role, and things like that. And one of the things that we've come to understand is that one very critical measure of effectiveness of that organization is how it's able to utilize its connections and networks of actors to be able to receive and disseminate information. And that if it doesn't have that either mandate or it doesn't have that ability to communicate, then it's not able to achieve its purpose. But at the same time, it also has to have the technical capacity to actually be able to do its incident response function. And so what we're confronted with is an organization that wants to have the technical capacity, but at the same time needs to figure out how to create and build and develop this network of relationships so that it can have both trust in the delivery of information and trust in its network of actors. And I think that that's something that in the setup of a CERT, I think ITU does a great job of this, is making sure that both of those things are there so that you have the capacity from the start. And I also wanted to comment one last thing was that Thomas brought up, is that it's really interesting on how the CERT does start the broader cybersecurity discussion. A lot of times when we've gone to a country, we've seen that the CERT is one of the first things that's been set up because it is seen as the sort of first line of defense in cybersecurity. And then, so making sure that context is there, but also making sure that it's not just seen as the solution, that it's not just the only cybersecurity aspect. Making that transition is something I think a lot of countries are looking at right now, and sort of what is the CERT's role in that broader sphere?
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Questions? some people that are kind of, I don't know if they're afraid, if they want to talk or not. So it's a very free panel here. So any other comments? No. I would like just to point some of the interesting points you made and Taylor made here, that they are from what is our perspective, just as an experience. I think the point you made about a lot of the maturity and capability being from the ability to communicate and technical capacity. So really the trust as built in this community, I think from my experience over the years, is trust not only that the team will not divulge confidential information or will do something wrong, but it's trust in its technical capability, and it's trust that actually doesn't matter how big or how formal it is, that actually there's a consistency in how it deals in information, and there is a consistency on the way that it actually provides support. Doesn't matter what are the range of services that you do. So I think in that respect, usually what we see is that the most effective teams are not necessarily the ones that have a legislation or mandates or other stuff, but the ones that actually can keep a consistent support to its constituency. It doesn't matter in what it goes. And I think it was very interesting, the comment from Thomas, that sometimes having to go to that work to get the buy-in of your constituency and have to get a trust and have some time to build that trust and to gather their buy-in into the process makes trusting the group more. So that is another experience, that is, if you involve everyone into creating your team, might be, and creating a national capability might be one of the ways to build trust from the start, because you have everyone involved into the creation of that structure, and you have everyone kind of knowing what they expect. Because I heard from here today some comments that kind of touch on the expectations people have on what a cert is, and that goes a lot for that expectation that in the report was said as throwing a cert on everything, as Switzerland said, that is really the problem is out there, and so let's create a cert, it's going to solve everything. So I think one of the takeouts that I saw today is that really it's a key component, but cannot be seen as the solution or as the actor that will solve all the problems. And as I was saying with Audrey's comment, I think the other one to improve on the privacy aspect, and is one that we are learning in Brazil too, that's much easier to talk about data protection and how important that is. And from our perspective, we always try to talk with the sectors in Brazil and even Latin America. We are trying to build a community in the region to consider carefully, don't collect. It's not just because you can collect some information that you should do it. So consider carefully what is the data that you need, in what level, how you should anonymize. I think these were some of the points that were made and that probably address some of the concerns that Frederica had about really what's the gathering, what's the information, how you were amassing data. And I think it's a huge responsibility, as if you start having a lot of data, it will be a target either of abuse by criminals or either maybe abused by others. So I think it's just summing up some of the ideas here. I don't know, Walt, you have any comments? Yeah, I was thinking, if nobody in the back is waving, do we have any remote comments? No. Well, Walt has a comment. I'm going to go for last night for my comment. Yes, I finished my comment. So. Just trying to figure out who of us will thank you all. So, and I would like really to thank you very much for being in the session, for providing this feedback, and this and more the kind of feedback that we want. As we said, we would like to receive feedback. So there's still time for anyone here if you want to talk to us now, talk to us via email. Join the discussion. We are still gonna decide how it goes, but we are gonna have the feedback from today and then move to a final draft. So if anyone would like to provide more feedback or any other comments, please feel free. I would like to thank Walt very much because he's the one putting all the text together and getting all the ideas that we are throwing in an unstructured way in the discussion and mailing list into a structured document and helping us to get our ideas around and really improving that. So I thank you all very much, and I thank you very much the other co-leads that I named at the beginning of the session, because they all helped a lot with bringing people to the discussion, raising awareness with stakeholders and providing ideas. And I thank very much all the panelists here that were some people that we provoked to be in the panel and to provide some feedback from outside the CSERT pool and the CSERT technical people. So thank you very much and have a great event this week. Oh, and Walt has a final comment.
No, I would like to thank the lead expert, Maarten van Horenbeek, who is not here, but is joining in from remotely for a tremendous amount of work. Christine also, but it also goes for Yuri and Jean-Robert and Atli. My final comment is not only thanking them, but I've been on this process for 2 years, and what I would like to reiterate is that this went from CSERT looking at themselves saying how hard life has become in the modern world to actually really addressing the topics that are facing them at this point in time. And that happened within a period of 1 year and 3 to 4 months, and actually starting to reach out in ways that we did not even perceive when we started at the beginning of August of last year, working toward the IGF 2014. And I think if the value of a best practice forum is shown, it is in this part of the process wherein people are starting to reinvent the thoughts about themselves, and that is extremely valuable and shows perhaps the best tangible outcome that this IGF could have, this best practice forum could actually present to the IGF. So for that, I want to thank the lead expert and all the people behind them that have been given the case studies this year that showed that progress. So for that, I thank you.